Welcome to Write On Audio. We hope you enjoy this feature presentation. All Write On Audio presentations are protected by copyright and are the exclusive property of Write On e-Publishing LLC. If you enjoy this presentation, please like, share, and subscribe to receive notifications of all our latest content. This presentation is intended for mature audiences. Discretion is advised. Now please enjoy this Write On Audio feature presentation.
Write On Audio presents Warrior Academy, a Write On Press feature. Two pairs of brown boots walked down a stone hallway. One took large strides, and the other dragged their feet, lightly tripping over a small dip in the ground. "I'm going to be sick." "No, you won't, Dixie. Everything will be fine." An arrow landed in between the feet of the frightened boy with red hair. "That's it. I'm going back to bed." Before the boy could pivot, his friend forced him forward. Behind them, they heard someone shout, "No bows in the hallway!" "Come on, Dixie, you'll be fine." "No, actually I won't. Statistically." Hendrix Melah, the commanding voice of the two friends' teacher, halted their conversation. "Class lineup is in 15 minutes. Go eat. I will not have my students fainting during the final exam." "Yes, sir," the two said, one more enthusiastically than the other. "Fruits and oats only, no sugar or sodium." Melah looped her arm through Hendrix's, pulling him into the cafeteria. The usually crowded room was scarce. The dining tables were occupied by single or one pair of students eating quietly. Some read books. Others' hands shook so hard food fell off their utensils. The whole room was permeated with anxiety and fear. "Statistically, I'm unlikely to succeed. I'm the worst in class, so there's no point in going." Melah rolled her eyes. "You're just saying that because you're scared of Kai." She placed a yogurt bowl and some fruit on his plate, as well as her own. "Of course I'm scared of Kai. Any logical person would be." Melah shot him a glare. "Any logical person who doesn't have your skill set would be," he corrected. Hendrix played with the food on his plate, pushing the berries into different corners of the plate, separating them by color. "I don't want to end up in the infirmary like Evan did last year." Melah rolled her eyes. "Kai cheated last year. He's not going to do that 2 years in a row. He'll be expelled." "We talking about Kai?" A well-muscled arm was thrown around Hendrix's shoulder, making him jump and his fruit intermingle again. "Chill, Dixie. You got this." Hendrix looked to his only other friend, another strong, intimidating female with strong looks to match. "I wish I could share in your optimism," he grumbled. "Have you eaten, Autumn?" Melah asked. Autumn pushed back her short blonde hair. It had recently been cut, by her of course. She claimed it was an advantage, but mostly its purpose was to anger the headmistress. "Yeah, got here early. Took a bath. I have to look good, you know, especially if I end up fighting our class angel over here." Melah pretended to blush and hid behind her hair. Then she laughed and flicked her hair behind her shoulder. "Your flattery will not make me go easy on you." Autumn leaned forward on her forearm, smirking. "I'm counting on it." An echoed ring of an ancient bell signaled that breakfast was over. Melah grabbed her plate along with Hendrix's and lazily stacked them with the others before she jogged back to her friends, where Autumn was still trying to calm Hendrix's mind. "And the odds of even getting paired with Kai are slim to none." "I wouldn't say slim, more like 1 in 16, but you are right. They will most likely pick someone more on his level." Hendrix and Autumn turned their eyes to Melah. Melah tilted her head back. "Oh, I'll surely fight him, but they'll save us for last. Wouldn't want to start off with the best ones, right?" "Right," Autumn chuckled. "Do you have a plan?" "His left wrist, it's been strained for a while. It hasn't fully healed yet. If I take out his hand, I'll win with ease. Then I'll throw his stupid ass into a wall." "Are you still mad about that? It was years ago." "It was humiliating. I want revenge." Autumn sighed with a smile as she opened the door to their classroom. "I love final exams." The class stood in one line, shoulder to shoulder. Identical outfits fitted each of them, gray mesh tops with tougher black vests that would protect the heart and ribs from major harm. Pants were suited to each body's figure, with no pockets or available spaces for hiding extra weapons. The black boots were laced tightly above the ankle. The regular classroom was void of all chairs, tables, and bookshelves. The windows were open, allowing a soft, cool breeze to filter into the room. The floor had mats laid out. Lining the outside walls were shelves holding gavels, hammers, shields, and an assortment of defensive and offensive tools of combat, and all were real and battle-ready. Unlike the softwood versions they had used in training, mannequins lined around the inside of the mats, they had previous cuts and dents in them from years of usage. Melah had her eye on a double-headed spear, her personal favorite. She loved how versatile it was. It could be used as a defensive as well as an offensive weapon. She made sure to practice with this one weapon in mind. "All right, stop looking at the weapons and pay attention." Mr. Alaric stood in his faculty version of the training uniform. A thicker black vest worn above a mesh gray top, the pants were looser, with pockets. Mr. Alaric untied the scarf he was wearing and tucked it into his pocket. A thin pair of glasses held back graying bangs which most often covered his eyes. "Final exams are today. You should have already warmed up and eaten. If you pass out or throw up, you will fail. Your performance today will determine your rank. Only the top 10 get to stay in this warrior class. And as this is the most advanced, I encourage you all to do your best. The rules are the same as last year, but I am required to say it all again, so pay attention. You are allowed one weapon and one defensive tool, a shield, helmet, or whatever. All fights last 30 minutes. If there is no victor by that time, one will be declared by myself and the other teachers. The match will be over when one competitor concedes defeat or if they are physically unable to continue fighting. There will be no cheating, no unnecessary harm, and no throwing axes into the audience. Autumn. Autumn shrugged. No promises. Pick your weapon and mentally prepare. I'll come back soon to grab the first team. Anyone who wishes to watch can, but you are not required to. Melah shot herself toward the stack of weapons and gripped the spear, smiling as she felt the smooth wood. As Melah went to retrieve the weapon, another hand wrapped around the shaft. "This one's mine, Angel." Melah ground her teeth. She knew exactly who belonged to that grungy, arrogant tone. "Back off, Kai. I got it first." "Don't care. I want the double spear. Why don't you go look at those pretty daggers?" Melah whipped around to face the raven-haired annoyance of a boy. "How about I use one of those pretty daggers to cut off your tongue?" Kai rolled his eyes. "It's not that big a deal. Just give me the spear." Kai pulled the weapon to his chest, yanking Melah closer. "You didn't even train with the spear. Why do you want it?" "I like taking things away from you. Or maybe I want to see rage fill your eyes." "You creep!" Melah twisted the spear, ducking under it so she stood behind Kai. She twisted her body and jerked the spear out of reach. She placed the bottom of the spear at her feet. "Go play with a sword!" Kai laughed, shrugging his shoulders. As he walked past, his left hand reached out and brushed hair behind her ear. Melah gripped his wrapped wrist and twisted, eager to see some pain in his eyes. But none came. Melah barely had a chance to open her mouth to question him when the door swung wide. "Kai, Hendricks, you're up first." "What?" Melah dropped Kai's wrist. Hendricks pressed himself back against the corner of the room, holding a dagger in one hand and a helmet in the other. "This is going to be fun!" Kai taunted, striding out of the room with a long sword propped upon his shoulder. "Does anyone want to come to watch?" Mr. Alaric asked with little enthusiasm in his voice. "Kai and the nerd? That'll be over in a second." "Not worth seeing." Melah and Autumn were the only two who left with them. "He favors his right side. He's strong but slow. Stay light on your feet. He'll try to attack you from behind, so make sure he stays in your line of sight." Hendricks nodded along as Melah and Autumn spat out information. "All right, girls, go find seats." Autumn hugged Hendricks first. She wrapped her hands around his. "Steady hands, steady mind. Say it." "Steady hands, steady mind." Hendricks spoke with a slight quiver. Melah placed the helmet over his head. It fell down past his eyes, so she pushed it up to look at his light green eyes, which started to water and turn a light shade of red. "Take this off during the fight and hit him with it. He won't see that coming. Stay in as long as you can." Hendricks started shaking his head. "I'm not going to make it. I'm going to fail." Tears spilled from his eyes as he spoke. "I'm going to have to leave the academy. I'll never be a true warrior." "Hey," Melah gripped his shoulders. "A true warrior is more than big muscles and a sword. A true warrior is intelligent and wise. A true warrior is accountable and trustworthy. Kai has none of that. You belong in this class. Show him why." Hendricks nodded. "Steady hands, steady mind." He repeated that with a soft tone. Melah and Autumn took their seats in the first row. Melah raised her thumb to her mouth and began to bite down on her nail. A hand came down on Melah's leg, which stopped its hyper-bouncing. "He'll be okay," Autumn insisted. "If he can get one slice or stab. Just one. Kai from the Raven family, and Hendrix from the Ironheart family. Please step forward." The fight started off slow. Kai played with Hendrix, swiping his sword at him while backing him into a corner. Hendrix only dodged and kept his eyes on Kai. People began to shout, stomping their feet in impatience. "Come on! Get on with it! Hear that?" Kai raved to Hendrix. "They want to see a show, a thrilling fight with blood and tears." Kai moved in closer, dragging his sword across the matted floor. "Come on, Dixie, make your mother proud." Hendrix had occupied the corner. His eyes tracked the sword, which continued to move ever closer toward him. Steady hands, steady mind. "What?" Hendrix looked up. His eyes darkened as he took in a large inhale. He took off the helmet, and with one swing he hit Kai at the jaw. The crowd went silent. Kai's sword raised, aimed toward Hendrix's chest. He brought the helmet down at his opponent's wrist. The sword dropped to the floor. Hendrix dropped the dagger and used both hands to swing the helmet into Kai's face. Kai gripped the helmet and tore it out of Hendrix's grip, tossing it behind him. He stared up at Hendrix with a split lip. "Grab the sword!" Melah yelled from the audience. Hendrix did as his friend stated. It took a second for him to lift it up, and when it was off the ground, it shook. Adrenaline coursed through his veins, but his victorious moment had been short-lived. With one kick, the sword flew out of Hendrix's hands. Kai pushed him to the ground, keeping him thereby kneeling on his chest, and began ramming his fist into Hendrix's face. Hendrix tried to block the attacks, but with one hard blow to the throat, his hands went to his throat, clawing at the skin, trying frantically to find air. He opened his mouth, blood dripping out. "Icon!" Kai landed a fist on his cheek, another to his eye, and then to his jaw. "Stop it! He's unconscious! Stop!" Autumn yelled. Mr. Alaric, along with the other teachers, stood up after the ring of a gong. "Kai is declared the victor. Please escort Hendrix to the infirmary." Melah and Autumn raced out of the auditorium. They found Hendrix on a cot being escorted out. His eyes were open, but they were bloodshot. Blood has dripped down his nose and flowed around his throat like a necklace. "You did so well, Dixie," Melah praised, grabbing his still shaking hand. "I'm thoroughly impressed, and you didn't die. I was right about going to the infirmary. Yes, you're very smart. We'll come to visit you when we're done." "Good luck," Hendrix whispered before leaning his head back and closing his eyes. Melah and Autumn stayed in the classroom, stretching and practicing with the mannequins. "Autumn! Melah!" Autumn jumped up. "Yes! The long-awaited battle commences. It has been... How long has it been?" 2 years. 2 years since our last spar, and I humbly conceded after an agonizing long clash of skill." Melah scoffed. "Yeah, sure, you can call it that." Autumn spun on her heels and walked backward, holding her axe over her shoulders. "You better watch your pretty hair, Angel. I might feel like cutting it off." "You can try." Melah laughed. They shook hands before they went to their respective hallways. Melah swung the spear around her a few times and bent her legs. She had fought twice already. Neither was physically challenging, but this fight had her heart beating faster. She tried to hide the smile out of professionalism, but she knew that the second Autumn said a funny quip, she'd be grinning. "Autumn from the Clover family and Melah from the Stonebridge family. Please step forward." The friends walked forth. Autumn waved to the audience as they cheered out both girls' names. Melah rolled her eyes and raised her spear in the air. The crowd roared. Autumn swung the axe around her hand. "Let's skip the foreplay, shall we?" Melah shrugged and held the spear out in front of her horizontally. "Fine by me." Autumn moved first, swinging the axe towards Melah's legs, which she jumped over with ease, anchoring one hand on top of her friend's head. She swung the spear so its metal body pressed itself against her throat. "I would have thought you've learned more in 2 years," Melah teased. "I have," Autumn gasped out before throwing her head back into Melah's face. The blow had enough strength for Autumn to break free and tackle Melah to the ground. With both girls' weapons scattered on the ground, they attempted to keep each other away from them. After many kicks, punches, hair pulls, and rolls, Autumn ended up on top. She had pinned Melah to the ground, her hands held firm above her head, knees on either side of her chest. Melah chose to look away from her friend's gloating stare. "Concede yet?" Autumn taunted. Melah stuck her tongue out and looked around, her spear slightly out of reach. "Not yet!" Melah swung her legs out, causing Autumn's legs to fall. Then she rolled Autumn over on her back. Melah grabbed the spear, close to the head, and pressed the cool, sharp metal against her opponent's neck. Autumn chuckled. All right, I concede. Melah lowered the spear and stood, offering Autumn a hand. She took it and they walked out of the arena together. That was close, Autumn said. You had me for a second, but I still won, Melah replied. Autumn frowned. I was distracted. You looked like you were going to concede. All part of the plan, Melah laughed back. The girls laughed and talked more as their wounds were assessed by a nurse. A few cuts and some bruises which would appear later on. It was the cleanest fight the arena had seen that day. The tournament continued throughout the day, and as more people were eliminated, the fights grew longer. Autumn battled once more before being eliminated, yet still securing her spot in the top 5. Melah waited in the hallway for the final fight. She swung her spear and bent her legs. Her arms were sore and her chest stung every time she breathed. But it was no time to succumb to the limitations of her body. She kept her head high and took deep breaths. The last match today. Melah from the Stonebridge family and Kai from the Raven family. Please step forward. The audience stood crowded down in the first rows, the announcer's voice barely audible above the cacophony of cheering from the mob. Kai had some light bruising on his arms and his swollen lip very visible against his paled face. It had turned a nice shade of purple. But more than that, he looked pissed. To encourage a swift battle, this fight will end in 5 minutes. Your time starts now. Kai raced forward with his sword. Melah raised the spear in time to block the blow, but it shook her stance. Kai took advantage of that falter and kicked her left knee. She went down, one leg bent and the other now spread out beside her. I want this over with, Kai sneered through gritted teeth. He swung his sword down, aimed at her head. Melah's eyes widened and raised her spear again, but this time she pushed herself back up. Ignoring the pain in her knee, Melah twisted the spear so that the sword flew out of Kai's hands. Not wasting a second, Melah jabbed the metal pole into his nose, then again to his throat. With one final kick to his chest, he went down, gasping for air. Melah stood over him, hiding the satisfaction she felt with a glare. Bet you wish you had a pretty little dagger right about now. Melah knelt on his chest and brought the sharp corner of her weapon to his throat. Concede, she demanded. No, he gasped. Melah pressed the blade harder, drawing blood. Concede, Kai! Kai tried to swing his legs up and around her, but he didn't reach her. She had settled too far up his chest. He reached up and gripped her shoulder, digging his fingers into the crevasses above her collarbone. But it still didn't faze her. Blood dripped out of his nose and into his mouth, staining his teeth red. You fought hard, concede, and we'll fight again next year. No! I don't lose, especially to a girl, Kai snarled back at her. His left fingers lowered to the bandage on his wrist. He pulled out a thin razor and sliced Melah's arm. Melah bit her tongue and tried to keep her grip on her spear steady. But once Kai stuck his fingers into the wound, she had no choice but to drop her hold of the spear and pull her arm to her chest, putting pressure on the wound. Kai took that chance to sit up and push Melah off him. He grabbed his sword and pointed it at her. You cheated! Melah shouted. No, my nails cut into your skin. You held a spear to my throat. Melah stood up. Her arm pressed up against her chest, causing blood to stain the front of her shirt. Kai used the other hand to wrap around the arm that held her spear, twisted her around to where her back pressed up against his chest, the spear stuck in between them. His sword wrapped around her neck. He leaned down and put his lips by her ear. If people believed that Evan passed out cold after I barely covered his mouth and they didn't find the cloth I doused in medicine, they'll believe anything. I run this school. You are nothing. The Warrior Academy isn't about accountability or integrity, or all of that crap you told the Ginger. It's about power, no matter what you do or how you do it. If you have the power, you are a warrior. And that, Angel, is why I never lose. Melah raised her wounded arm. She tried to find a strong grip on one of his fingers. Kai laughed as her hand shook, but she found an anchor on his pointer finger. Taking a deep breath, Melah kept her eyes open, focusing her line of vision on Autumn in the crowd. Steady hands, steady mind, she said to herself. Melah yanked back as hard as she could. A loud pop came from Kai's now dislocated finger. She ducked as Kai released his grip on her arm. She spun and swung the spear, sticking it in between his hand and the sword, knocking it out of his grip. With her injured hand, she picked up the sword while Kai held his hand to his chest. Melah dropped down and swung her leg at Kai's ankles, causing him to fall hard onto his knees. She crossed the sword and spear over each other and held them on either side of his throat. Sweat mixed with tears down Melah's face, making the cuts sting. But she kept her eyes on Kai's, not paying attention to the black spots forming in her vision. The gong run and Mr. Alaric stood. The time has ended. Melah is the victor. That ends today's tournaments. Melah couldn't find it in herself to give a smart remark, but she felt her point had been made. The nurse escorted Melah out with one hand on her lower back. When Melah looked behind, Kai's eyes were still on her, the same expression of shock and disbelief on his face. Autumn met her in the hallway, helping the nurse get her to the infirmary. Melah could see her lips moving, but the sound of her heartbeat drowned out all other sounds. She helped herself into a bed with mild groaning. Hendricks sat up next to her. Autumn helped her drink some water. It cleared her head enough and she could hear Hendricks speak. "How did it go?" "She kicked some privileged boy's ass is how it went. She held his own sword against—" As Autumn retold the story in exaggerated detail, Melah stared at the window. She watched the clouds move gently across the sky. At some point, the light blue sky faded to a navy, and then black, and the light fluffy clouds were replaced with dim stars. "Melah?" A hand touched her now wrapped arm, and her mind jerked back into the room. Autumn and Hendricks stood by her bed. She tried to remember if they had left and came back, or if they had stayed by her side. A deep vibration in her skull caused her to stop that line of thinking. "We all passed!" Autumn yelled, and Melah winced. "Sorry," she spoke softer. "We passed. We're all staying in the top warrior class." "Really?" Melah looked to Hendricks, whose face had been painted with black and blue spots. "How?" "Well, I technically made the first contact, so my grade was initially higher than I had expected. It gave me a good lead on the others. And it absolutely helped that Kai was expelled. They found the razor that he used to cut you on the floor. He made a big scene in the hallway, cried like the coward he truly is." "I felt bad for him," Hendricks admitted. "Why? He got what he deserved. Dixie, he wasn't going to stop beating you. You know that, right? If Mr. Alaric hadn't stopped him, you could still be in a hospital bed right now. He wanted to be a warrior like us. He assumed that it was a right, something he was owed. His ego clouded his mind, his judgment. During our fight, he told me, 'Make your mother proud.' I think he was putting his own anxieties on me. Did you notice our headmistress wasn't here? My guess is that Kai was overcompensating. He wanted his victories to be so well known that his mother would have been proud of him. His motivation was proving his worth to his parents, not the drive of protecting the people." Melah smiled. "That's very sweet, Dixie, but maybe we can go back to trash-talking the guy who cut my arm open." Hendricks's eyes widened and he nodded. "Of course, that jerk?" Autumn let out a hearty laugh and wrapped an arm around his shoulders. "We'll work on that. We'll let you rest, Melah, but once you're better, I demand a rematch. I could take you right now." "I know, Angel. Get some sleep. We'll come back tomorrow morning. I'll sneak you some good food." Melah watched her two best friends leave the infirmary. She rested her head back on the pillow. Even with a deep wound in her arm, cracked ribs, a collection of deep bruises across her body, she closed her eyes with a smile. She would become a true warrior. She was the strongest in her class, and she would only become stronger. The end. This has been a Right On audio presentation of Warrior Academy, a Right On Press feature.
We hope you've enjoyed this Right On audio feature presentation. If so, please like, share, and subscribe to receive notifications of all our latest content, and join us again soon for our next Right On audio feature presentation.